Assalamu alaikum students. This is your teacher Muhammad Umar Khatak for the subject Project Management, and this is our 17th lecture and chapter number 4. Today the topic of our discussion is conflict and the project life cycles. Conflict and the project life cycle. In this lecture, we will categorize the types of conflict that frequently occur in the project environment and then amplify the nature of these conflict. Finally, we will link the project life cycle with the fundamental conflict categories and discover that certain patterns of conflict are associated with different periods in the life of a project. With this knowledge, the project manager can do a faster and more accurate job of diagnosing the nature of these conflicts he or she is facing, thereby reducing the likelihood of escalating the conflict by dealing with it ineffectually. Life cycle. We use four-stage model with project formation, also called conception, build-up, called planning and selection, main program, execution, and phase out, which is also called termination, identified as the stages of the life cycle. During the first stage, senior management tentatively, sometimes unofficially, approves preliminary planning for a project. Initial planning is undertaken, basic objectives are often adopted, and the project may be scoped out. The second stage is typified by detailed planning, budgeting, scheduling, and aggregation of resources. In the third stage, the lion's share of actual work on the project is accomplished. During the final stage of the life cycle, work is completed and products are turned over to the client or user. This stage also includes disposition of the project's assets and personnel. It may even include preparation for the initial stage of another related project to follow. All stages of the project life cycle appear to be typified by conflict on the examination of the data. It appears that conflicts fall into three fundamentally different categories. Number one, groups working on the project may have different goals and expectations. Number two, there is considerable uncertainty about who has the authority to make decisions. And number three, there are interpersonal conflicts between people who are parties at interest in the project. Some conflicts reflect the fact that day to day work on projects is usually carried out by many different units of the organization, units that often differ in their objectives and technical judgment. The result is that these units have different expectations about the project, its cost and rewards, its relative importance, and its timing. Conflicts about schedules, inter project priorities, cost estimates, and staff time tend to fall into this category. At base, they arise because the project manager and the functional managers have very different goals. The project manager's concern is the project. The primary interest of the functional manager is the daily operation of the functional department. Other conflicts reflect the fact that both technical and administrative procedures are important aspects of the project management. Uncertainty about who has the authority to make decisions on resource allocation, on administrative procedures, on communication, on technological choices, and on all other matters affecting the project produces conflict between project manager and the other parties. Finally, some conflicts reflect the fact that human beings are an integral part of all projects. In an environment that depends on the cooperation of many persons, it seems inevitable that some personalities will clash. Also, in conflicts between the project and the client or between senior management and the project, it is the project manager who personifies the project and thus is generally a party to the conflict. The three types of conflict seem to involve the parties at interest to the project in identifiable ways. The different goals and objectives of the project manager, senior manager, and functional managers are a major and constant source of conflict. For example, senior management is apt to fix all three parameters of the project: time, cost, and performance, and then to assume that project manager will be able to achieve all the preset targets. Underestimation of cost and time is a natural consequence of this practice, and it leads directly to conflict between project manager, as a representative of the project team, and senior management. A second consequence is that the project manager tries to pass the stringent cost and time estimates along to the functional managers, whose units are expected to perform certain work on the project. More conflicts arise when the functional managers complain that they cannot meet the time and cost restrictions. All this tends to build failure into the job of managing a project. Another source of conflict between the project manager and senior management. Functional managers also may not see eye to eye with the project manager on such issues as the project's priority or the desirability of assigning a specifically named individual to work on the project, or even the applicability of a given technical approach to the project. In addition, the client's priorities and schedule, whether an inside or outside client, may differ radically from those of senior management and the project team. Finally, the project team has its own ideas about the appropriateness of the schedule or level of the project staffing. There are, of course, a number of methods for settling conflicts about priorities between projects as well as intra-project conflicts. Often, the project selection model used to approve project for funding will generate a set of projects ranked by some measure of value. It is also common for senior management to determine inter-project priorities. The relative importance of the various tasks in an individual project is set by the project manager, who allocates scarce resources depending on the requirements of the schedule, task difficulty, resource availability, and similar considerations. The existence of these methods for resolving priority conflicts is all too often irrelevant because there is a powerful tendency for both project and functional managers to optimize their individual interest with little regard for the total organization. In matrix organizations, the center of authority is particularly unclear. Locus of authority conflicts are endemic to matrix organized projects. The project team and the client tend to focus on the technical procedures, debating the proper approach to the project or perhaps how to solve individual problems that can occur at any stage. Senior management has other fish to fry. Not only do they insist that the project manager adopt and maintain a set of administrative procedures that confirm the organizational and legal standards, but they also are quite concerned with who reports to whom and whose permission is required to take what action. The astute reader will note that such concerns are not entirely appropriate for matrix organized projects. The conflict resolution potential of partnering and project charters should be quite clear. Neither technique will stop conflicts from arising, but they will sharply lower the intensity of the conflicts as well as provide a framework for resolving conflicts. They will even allow an environment in which the project manager and functional managers can take positions that support the total organization rather than sub-optimizing the project or the function. Project managers will often find themselves arguing for scheduling or resource priorities from functional managers who outrank them by several levels. Neither the functional nor the project managers are quite sure about who has the authority. A constant complaint of project manager is, "I have to take the responsibility, but I have no authority at all." People problems arise for the most part within the project team. Though functional managers may clash with project managers, the former accusing the latter of being pushy and the latter accusing the former of foot dragging. Most personalities clash on the project team result from differences in technical approach or philosophy of problem solving and in methods used to implement the project results. Of course, it is quite possible that a personality conflict causes technical conflict it is also possible that any type of conflict will appear at first blush to be personality conflict. Now, we put these conflicts into chronological perspective of the project life cycle. So the first stage that we are going to look on is project formation or the conception stage. In the initial stage of the project life cycle, most of the conflict canters around the inherent confusion of setting up a project in the environment of matrix management. Almost nothing about the project or its governance has been decided. Even the project's technical objectives, not clearly defined or established, are apt to be understood only in the most general sense. Moving from this state of semi-chaos to relatively ordered world of the build-up stage is difficult. First, the technical objectives of the project must be specified to a degree that will allow the detailed planning of the build-up stage to be accomplished. Second, commitment of resources to the project must be forthcoming from senior management and from functional managers. Third, the priority of the project relative to the priorities of the parent organization's other projects must be set and communicated. Fourth, the organizational structure of the project must be established to an extent sufficient for the work breakdown structure and a linear responsibility chart, or its equivalent, to be prepared during the next stage of the life cycle. These conditions are not sufficient, but they are most certainly necessary if the conflicts typical of the formation stage are to be resolved, at least at a reasonable level, and not simply carried forward to the build-up stage in the exasperated state. The project manager who practices conflict avoidance in this stage is inviting disaster in the next. The four fundamental issues above underlie such critical but down to earth matters as these. Which of the functional areas will be needed to accomplish project tasks? What will be required level of involvement of each of the functional areas? How will conflicts over resources, facility usage between this and the other projects be settled? What about the resource facility conflicts between the project and the routine work of the function? Who has the authority to decide the technical, scheduling, personnel, and cost questions that will arise? Most important, how will change in the parent organization priorities be communicated to everyone involved? The three of the four fundamental issues, delimiting the technical objectives, getting management commitment, and setting the project's relative priority, must be resolved irrespective of what organizational form is selected for the project. It should also be noted that the organizational structure selected will have a major impact on the ways in which conflicts are handled. The stronger the matrix, having pure projects as its limits, the more authoritative the role played by the project manager. The weaker the matrix, having functional organization as its limit, the more authority is embedded in the functional managers. Lack of clarity about the relative power, influence, authority of the project manager and the functional manager is a major component of all conflicts involving technical decisions, resource allocation, and scheduling. Now let's look at the next stage, the project build-up stage, also called as planning and selection. Conflicts occurring in the build-up stage over project priorities, schedules, and administrative procedures appear as an extension from the previous program phase. This is the period during which the project moves or should move from a general concept to a highly detailed set of plans. If the project's organization format is a strong matrix, the project manager seeks a commitment of people from the functional departments. If the project is organized as a weak matrix, the project manager seeks a commitment of work from the functional departments. In either case, The project manager seeks commitment from functional managers who are under pressure to deliver support to other projects in addition to the routine, everyday demands made on their departments. As the project plan becomes detailed, conflicts over technical issues build up again. Conflicts between the project manager and the functional areas tend to predominate. Usually, the functional departments can claim more technical expertise than the project manager, who is a generalist. On occasion, however, the project manager is also a specialist. In such situations, discussions between the functional manager and the project manager about the best technical approach often result in conflict. The total level of conflict is at its highest in the transition period. Now, let's go to the third stage, the main program, also called as execution. Schedules are still a major source of conflict in the main program phase of the project life cycle, though the proximate cause of the schedule related conflict is usually different than in the earlier stages. Project plans have been developed and approved by everyone involved, although perhaps grudgingly, and the actual work is underway. Let us make an assumption that is certain to be correct. Let us assume that some activity runs into difficulty and is late in being completed. Every task that is dependent on this late activity will also be delayed. Some of these subsequent activities will, if sufficiently late and if the late work is not made up, delay the entire project. In order to prevent this consequence, the project manager must try to get the schedule back on track. But catching up is considerably more difficult than falling behind. Catching up requires extra resources that the functional groups who are doing the catching up will demand, but which the project manager may not have. The more complex the project, the more difficult it is to trace and estimate the impact of all the delays, and the more resources that must be consumed to get things back on schedule. Maintaining the project schedule is precisely an exercise in managing trade offs, but adding to the project's cost or scaling down the project's technical capabilities in order to save time are trade offs the project manager will not take if there are any viable alternatives. The project manager's ability to make trade offs is often constrained by contract, company policy, and ethical consideration. In reality, trade off decisions are extremely difficult. Like schedule conflicts, technical conflicts are frequent and serious during the main program stage. Also, like schedule conflicts, the source of technical conflicts is somewhat different than in earlier stages. Just as a computer and a printer must be correctly linked together in order to perform properly, so must the many parts of a project. These linkages are known as interfaces. The number of interfaces increases rapidly as the project gets larger, which is to say that the system gets more complex. As the number of interfaces increases, so does the probability that problems will arise at the interfaces. The need to manage these interfaces and correct incompatibilities is the key to the technical conflicts in the main program phase. Now, the fourth stage, the project phase out stage, conflicts in that stage, the termination. As in the main program stage, schedule is the major source of conflict during project phase out. If schedule slippage has occurred in the main program stage, and it probably has, the consequences will surely be felt in the final stage. During phase out, projects with firm deadlines develop an environmental best described as hectic. The project manager, project team, and functional groups often band together to do what is necessary to complete the project on time and to specifications. Technical problems are comparatively rare during phase out because most have been solved or bypassed earlier. Similarly, working interfaces have been developed and put in place. If the project involves implementing a technology in an outside client's system, technical conflicts will probably arise, but they usually are less intense. Personality conflicts are the second ranked source of conflicts during phase out. They ascribe these conflicts to interpersonal stress caused by the pressure to complete the project and to individuals' natural anxiety about leaving the project either to be assigned to another or to be returned to a functional unit. This is also called as projectitis. Conflicts, sometimes quite bitter, focused on the distribution of the project's capital equipment and supplies when the project is completed. Conflict also arises between projects phasing out and those just starting, particularly if the latter needs resources or personnel with scarce talents being used by the former. The upshot is simple. Conflicts is an inherent characteristic of projects, and the project manager is constantly beset by conflict. The ability to reduce and resolve conflict in ways that support achievement of the project's goal is a prime requisite for success as a project manager. The primary tool to accomplish conflict resolution and reduction in negotiation and the method of handling conflict established in the project formation stage will set the pattern for the entire project. Therefore, the style of negotiation adopted by the project manager is critical. The similarities between the confrontation problem solving technique for conflict resolution and win win negotiation are quite striking. That would be the end of the lecture. Thank you.